The American military experience in World War II frequently appears in popular historical memory as a uniform march toward victory. The reality presented a profoundly fractured landscape of wildly varying extremes. The United States government mobilized millions of personnel between 1941 and 1945, pulling citizens from farms, factories, and high schools into a massive global apparatus. A lottery then dictated the true measure of a soldier's experience. Draft boards and assignment officers held the power of life and death, determining whether a man spent the war repairing trucks in a quiet rear echelon or fighting for survival in a humid Pacific jungle. A modern military requires a vast infrastructure to project power across oceans. For every rifleman on the front line, numerous soldiers worked behind the scenes in administrative, support, or manual labor roles. The global supply chain stretched from the factories of Detroit to the ports of England and the staging bases of Australia. The soldiers operating this machinery wore the uniform and served vital strategic purposes, but their exposure to lethal violence remained incredibly low. Frontline riflemen made up a tiny fraction of the army, but they took the vast majority of the casualties. A soldier's reality came down to three things: where they deployed, when they arrived, and what division patch they wore. We're tracking those specific divisions to rank the American war experience, starting with the safest garrison assignments and ending with the deadliest combat zones you could be assigned to in the war. Before we map out exactly how terrible a soldier's odds of survival were on the ground, we have to look at the massive naval infrastructure that dragged them across the ocean to get there. Moving millions of troops across hostile waters required a level of global power projection that the United States had been building since the Navy was first established in 1775. You can trace that deep naval heritage and experience a significantly more entertaining version of it with today's sponsor, World of Warships. World of Warships is a free-to-play tactical naval combat game featuring hundreds of historically inspired warships across multiple nations. You and your friends can jump straight into the action, commanding everything from nimble destroyers to massive battleships and aircraft carriers. The game focuses entirely on team-based strategy, dropping you into highly detailed environments with the realistic visuals, dynamic weather, and maps inspired by real-world historical locations. Right now, the game is celebrating America's semi-quincentennial, marking 250 years since the Declaration of Independence was adopted. They're marking the occasion with a special 250th US anniversary event running through July 15th that essentially works like an interactive naval museum. As you play matches, you automatically unlock historical artwork and documentary videos that trace the story of American independence. It basically gives you a way to battle through history, earn exclusive rewards, and celebrate the spirit that changed the world while sitting comfortably in your room. Brand new ships will be introduced during this campaign, including the Tier 9 cruiser Fort Worth and the Tier 10 Wisconsin Golden. Dropping into just a single battle right now hands you a free anniversary bundle in the armory, instantly giving your fleet custom paint jobs, unique visual effects that trigger when you blast an opponent out of the water, and a stack of supply crates filled with extra gear to jumpstart your progress. The developers are also dropping new live service content updates every single month so the gameplay stays fresh. Plus, if you aren't on PC, you don't have to miss out on any of this because the game is also available on console via World of Warships Legends. You can join the fleet right now by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment and entering the invite code USA250. They're handing new and returning players a massive care package containing 1 million in-game credits, 7 days of premium account time, 500 doubloons, the Stars and Stripes camo, and 2 premium ships, the cruiser USS Albany and the destroyer USS Smith. On top of all that, if you're a brand new player and you stick around for 10 battles, they'll even let you choose an additional classic American warship like the South Carolina, St. Louis, or Wicks to permanently add to your collection. Now, let's get back to the video. The absolute safest division assignments belong to units that either served as strategic garrisons far from the front or saw their combat roles completely dissolved upon overseas deployment. Out of the 91 active divisions the United States mobilized, a select few largely avoided the lethal industrial violence of the 1940s. The War Department directed these men to perform essential guard duties, manual labor, and training roles. The primary challenges for these soldiers involved profound boredom and repetitive physical tasks far from the front lines. The 98th Infantry Division serves as a prime example of this reality. The military activated the division in 1942 and sent the men through standard combat training. The War Department then shipped the 98th to the Hawaiian Islands in April 1944. The division spent the duration of the war guarding military installations and beaches across Hawaii. They maintained a defensive posture against the Japanese naval threat that had effectively ceased to exist after the Battle of Midway. The soldiers of the 98th navigated tropical weather, conducted training exercises, and managed the routine administration of a massive island garrison. The 2nd Cavalry Division experienced a different yet equally non-lethal trajectory. The military deployed this segregated unit to North Africa in 1944. Upon arrival, the War Department immediately deactivated the division. Theatre commanders desperately needed logistical manpower rather than horse-mounted cavalry or light armor. The military then broke up the division and repurposed the men into service units, and these soldiers spent the war working as stevedores, supply clerks, and truck drivers. They unloaded cargo ships in massive Mediterranean ports and drove supplies across North Africa and Italy. The work proved physically exhausting, but it kept these men shielded from the lethal casualty rates experienced by the infantry. Of course, we can't detail every single support unit and non-combat formation that served during the conflict, but we will put the complete list of divisions that fall under this specific non-combat tier on the screen right now. Feel free to pause the video to see where these specific units spent their war. A second group of American divisions entered the European theatre of operations during the final weeks of the conflict. By the spring of 1945, the German military lacked fuel, air support, and experienced manpower. Divisions arriving during this period encountered an enemy resistance on the brink of total collapse. The strategic situation allowed these units to log minimal combat time before the war officially ended. The military activated the 16th Armored Division in 1943, for instance, but the unit spent 2 years training in the United States. The division then arrived in Europe and entered combat on May 5, 1945. They spent exactly 3 days in combat. Their armored columns advanced into Czechoslovakia and liberated the city of Plzeň. They moved against an enemy actively seeking to surrender to American forces rather than face the advancing Soviet army. The 16th Armored took only 32 battle casualties during this brief window. The 20th Armored Division followed a similar timeline. They logged 8 days of combat in Bavaria and suffered fewer than 200 casualties. The 97th Infantry Division originally prepared for the Pacific Theatre, but military planners diverted them to Europe to replace losses from the Battle of the Bulge. They fought for roughly a month in the Central Europe campaign. American logistics operated at peak efficiency during this period, providing the 97th with overwhelming artillery and air support, and the division advanced rapidly through the Ruhr pocket and captured tens of thousands of German prisoners. The rapid collapse of the Axis powers allowed these late arriving divisions to transition almost immediately into military administration. Troops managed massive populations of displaced people and captured prisoners. They enjoyed an abundance of food and logistical resources while governing the defeated German population. For these soldiers, the war consisted of a brief, victorious road march followed by a comfortable and secure occupation duty. To keep things moving, the rest of the units that caught this late war lucky break are up on the screen right now. Pause here if you want to check the full roster of these late arrivals, because next, we're getting into the conventional combat deployments. The vast majority of the American fighting force falls into the conventional combat reality. Dozens of armored and infantry divisions represent the standard experience of the frontline soldier during the Second World War. These units spent anywhere from 3 to 7 months in active combat zones across North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. The daily routine for these divisions featured constant artillery fire, trench foot, and a complete reliance on combat rations. Medical officers recorded widespread gastrointestinal illness caused by the prolonged consumption of processed canned meats like the C ration and K ration. Frontline troops lived in freezing mud or sweltering jungles for weeks at a time without access to hot food, dry clothing, or basic sanitation. The combat proved highly lethal and mentally exhausting. These divisions sustained heavy casualties and required constant streams of replacement troops to maintain operational strength. The sheer momentum of the Allied industrial machine kept these units supplied and moving forward through hostile territory. Going through the deployments for all 60+ divisions in this middle tier would take hours, so we put the full roster on the screen right now instead. Pause to see where a specific unit landed, and once you're ready, we're starting the countdown for the 15 absolute worst deployments of the war. Military commanders deployed the 106th Infantry Division to the Ardennes in December 1944. They sent this inexperienced division to a quiet, static sector in the Schnee-Eifel to gain basic frontline experience, and then the unit moved into their positions expecting a relatively peaceful winter deployment managing defensive lines. On December 16th, the German military unleashed a massive counteroffensive. The 106th took the full weight of the advancing German armored columns, and heavy snow and thick fog blinded the Americans and grounded all Allied air support. The soldiers lacked proper winter gear and heavy anti-tank weaponry to repel the sudden thrust. The sheer volume of the enemy assault shattered the division's thinly spread lines. 2 entire regiments of the 106th ceased to exist as fighting forces within 72 hours. Surrounded and out of ammunition, approximately 7,000 American soldiers surrendered to the advancing enemy. The division suffered over 8,000 total casualties and logged only 63 days in combat before being destroyed. While the 106th suffered a brief ambush, the 34th Infantry Division settled into a grueling marathon. Known as the Red Bulls, the military sent them to fight across North Africa and Italy. The division ground its way through the mountains of Tunisia before hitting the heavily fortified Gustav Line in Italy. The terrain forced the infantry into brutal vertical warfare, and they assaulted deeply entrenched German positions on rocky slopes where mechanized support couldn't reach them. Mules and human-carrying parties hauled rations and ammunition up the mountain trails under constant indirect fire. Their most punishing engagement occurred at Monte Cassino. The 34th launched repeated frontal assaults against a mountain stronghold through flooded valleys and minefields. The division suffered massive casualties in the freezing mud trying to crack the German defenses before commanders rotated them off the line. They accumulated 517 days in combat and suffered over 16,000 battle casualties, requiring constant replacement drafts to maintain fighting strength. Enduring a similar time frame in the Mediterranean was the 45th Infantry Division. Known as the Thunderbirds, they conducted multiple amphibious landings, fighting across Sicily, Salerno, and the Anzio beachhead before pushing through southern France and into Germany. The men spent over a year and a half actively engaged with enemy forces. At Anzio, the division held a highly compressed, flat beachhead against massive German counterattacks. The German military controlled the surrounding high ground and heavily bombarded the pocket daily with artillery, including massive railway guns. The tight geographic space left the infantry completely exposed with absolutely no safe rear area to rest. The division fought off massive armoured assaults in the mud and absorbed continuous explosive barrages. The 45th logged 511 combat days and took over 20,000 battle casualties. If the Mediterranean offered a grueling test of endurance, Northern Europe delivered an entirely different kind of misery for units like the 28th Infantry Division. Commander sent them into the Hürtgen forest on the Belgian-German border in late 1944. The dense 50-square-mile fir forest completely negated American advantages in air power and mechanized armor. Freezing autumn rain turned the ground into a bottomless morass of mud. The German military utilized tree bursts against the advancing infantry. They fired artillery shells fused to explode high in the canopy, raining lethal wooden splinters and steel shrapnel down into the American foxholes. Standard cover provided no protection against this vertical bombardment, leaving the soldiers exposed to fire from above. The 28th launched a disastrous assault on the town of Schmidt under these conditions. US artillery failed to neutralize German positions and communication networks collapsed entirely. The division recorded 196 days in combat and absorbed over 15,000 battle casualties, creating a personnel turnover rate that forced a complete reconstruction of the unit. Forest fighting decimated the 28th, but the 36th Infantry Division found their worst deployment at a river crossing back in Italy. Their defining trauma occurred at the Rapido River in early 1944, when American commanders ordered the division to cross a fast-flowing current directly into heavily fortified German positions. The assault happened at night under freezing rain and intense enemy observation. Boats capsized in the swift current, drowning heavily burdened infantrymen before they even reached the opposite bank. German artillery destroyed makeshift bridges as quickly as combat engineers attempted to construct them. German machine guns caught the surviving infantry in the open on the muddy banks. The troops lacked heavy cover and took plunging fire from elevated positions across the river. The 36th recorded 400 days in combat and suffered over 19,000 battle casualties across their Mediterranean and European campaigns. While the line infantry ground it out in the mud for months on end, the 82nd Airborne Division experienced a completely different deployment cycle. Airborne divisions relied on combat jumps followed by withdrawals to secure rear areas to refit, but the 82nd endured an incredibly brutal schedule. The division jumped into the chaotic night skies over Sicily and fought through the grinding mud of the Italian mainland at Salerno and Anzio. They later spearheaded the D-Day invasion, dropping behind Utah Beach in the dark to face heavy German anti-aircraft fire. The paratroopers fought for over a month in the Normandy hedgerows without conventional supply lines or heavy armored support. During the massive Battle of the Bulge offensive, commanders deployed the 82nd to the northern shoulder of the salient, and they fought ferocious defensive actions in the freezing snow and blunted massive German armored penetrations. They accumulated 422 days in action and took nearly 8,000 battle casualties. Dropping behind enemy lines carried massive risks, but walking straight into a heavily defended beachhead proved just as lethal for the 29th Infantry Division. They stepped directly into the mechanized slaughter of Omaha Beach on the morning of June 6, 1944. The military assigned them to land alongside the 1st Infantry Division on the western sectors of the beachhead. The first wave suffered catastrophic losses the moment the landing craft ramps dropped into the surf. German machine guns wiped out entire companies before the men even reached the sand. The survivors of the beach landing spent the next several weeks fighting yard by yard through the claustrophobic Normandy bocage. The dense, ancient hedgerows heavily favored the German defenders and turned every farm field into a bloody siege. American armor proved largely ineffective in this terrain, and the infantry cleared hidden machine gun nests and mortar pits by hand. The 29th took massive casualties securing the ruined town of Saint-Lô. They suffered over 20,000 battle casualties during their 242 days in combat, resulting in a personnel turnover rate exceeding 200%. Landing shortly after the 29th in Normandy, the 90th Infantry Division marched into that same heavily defended vegetation. Activated with soldiers primarily from Texas and Oklahoma, they earned the nickname the Tough Hombres. Pushing inland from Utah Beach, poor initial leadership and fierce German resistance resulted in catastrophic casualties during their first month of combat. The division had to replace its commanders and reorganize while actively taking enemy fire. They later recovered to spearhead the assault across the flooded Moselle River, and they fought through heavily defended riverbanks under intense artillery barrages. The 90th fought a brutal war of attrition, grinding through the Saarland and eventually slamming into the northern flank of the German counteroffensive during the freezing winter of 1944. The division spent 308 days in combat, took over 19,000 battle casualties, and recorded a 196% personnel turnover rate. The 2nd Infantry Division also survived the Normandy breakout, only to face the ultimate test of their endurance during that exact same winter. Landing at Omaha Beach on D-Day +1, the division immediately engaged in the grueling hedgerow warfare, forcing the infantry to systematically clear every farm field and stone wall. The division later assaulted their heavily fortified French port city of Brest. The infantry fought house to house through booby-trapped streets and ruined buildings to secure the submarine pens, but the true crucible arrived during the Battle of the Bulge months later. Assigned to hold the critical Elsenborn Ridge, the 2nd Infantry Division faced repeated massive assaults by German panzer divisions. The American infantrymen dug into the frozen earth and held the line against overwhelming armored superiority. They absorbed horrific artillery barrages and successfully prevented the German offensive from breaking out into the open countryside. They logged 303 continuous combat days, suffered over 16,000 battle casualties, and absorbed a 183% personnel turnover rate. Just a few miles away during that same winter offensive, the 4th Infantry Division was already fighting for its life after barely surviving a previous slaughter. The military initially deployed the division to lead the amphibious assault on Utah Beach on D-Day, and while that landing went relatively smoothly compared to the bloodbath at Omaha, the division marched directly into a nightmare months later. Commanders ordered the 4th into the Hürtgen Forest in November 1944 to relieve the shattered 28th Infantry Division. The 4th walked into the exact same freezing meat grinder. German artillery tree bursts decimated their ranks in the dense, dark woods, raining jagged steel and wooden splinters into their foxholes. After surviving the Hürtgen campaign, the military sent the exhausted division to a supposedly quiet sector in the Ardennes to rest and absorb replacements. Weeks later, the German army launched the massive Battle of the Bulge offensive directly into their lines. The 4th Infantry Division fought desperate defensive actions in freezing snow without proper winter clothing. The 4th recorded 299 days in combat, suffered over 22,000 battle casualties, and experienced a 252% personnel turnover rate. Entering our top 5 is a unit that had been bleeding since the very first amphibious assaults of the war. The Big Red One fought extensively across North Africa and Sicily, and the War Department assigned them to spearhead the Normandy invasion based on this veteran experience, placing the division on the eastern half of the Omaha beachhead. The intricate Allied logistical plan collapsed in the opening hours of the June 6th assault. Strong ocean currents scattered the landing craft along the coast, and rough seas swamped the amphibious tanks meant to provide covering fire. Heavy bombers delayed their drops through low clouds and missed their targets entirely. As the landing ramps dropped, the infantrymen faced interlocking machine gun fire and pre-sighted artillery from the veteran German 352nd Infantry Division. Soldiers carrying heavy equipment waded through deep surf and crossed hundreds of yards of exposed sand while navigating barbed wire and mines. The 1st Division suffered massive casualties on D-Day alone. The unit pushed inland and eventually fought through the grueling urban combat of Aachen. They accumulated 443 days in combat, absorbed over 20,000 battle casualties, and suffered a personnel turnover rate of over 200%. While the 1st Division ground its way across Europe, the 32nd Infantry Division endured the longest combat deployment of the entire war over in the Pacific. The War Department deployed the division to the swamps of New Guinea in late 1942 to assault Japanese beachheads at Bunagona. Command staff drastically underestimated the enemy, assuming they held only hasty field entrenchments. Japanese forces actually held brilliantly camouflaged interlocking log and sand bunkers that easily absorbed standard infantry weapons fire. The troops lacked proper jungle training and attacked through waist-deep, stagnant mangrove swamps under the relentless equatorial sun. Disease decimated the ranks faster than enemy fire. The division survived the New Guinea campaign only to deploy to the Philippines for the Battle of Luzon. The infantry spent months conducting exhausting patrols through rugged mountain terrain to root out entrenched Japanese defenders. They fought a grueling war of attrition, utilizing flamethrowers and explosive charges to clear deep cave systems yard by yard. They recorded a war-high 654 days in combat, suffering over 7,000 battle casualties along tens of thousands of non-battle casualties driven by tropical disease. While the 32nd Infantry Division spent years grinding through the Pacific, the 96th Infantry Division faced an apocalyptic climax during the invasion of Okinawa in April 1945. The Japanese military transformed the island into a fortress of concentric defensive rings and deeply fortified coral caves. The 96th Infantry Division launched massive frontal assaults against heavily entrenched positions like Kakazu Ridge and Hacksaw Ridge. The Japanese defenders utilized reverse slope defenses, interlocking machine guns, and pre-sighted mortar fire to inflict maximum blood loss on the advancing Americans. Relentless torrential rains turned the island into a sea of deep, viscous mud. The terrain entirely immobilized American tanks, forcing the infantry to assault the ridges without armored support. Men resupplied ammunition and evacuated the wounded by hand while sinking in the mud under constant enemy fire. Unburied corpses dissolved into the earth, and maggots infested the clothing and wounds of the living. The division spent 73 days in highly concentrated combat, absorbing over 8,000 battle casualties and replacing massive numbers of troops lost to combat fatigue. The 7th Infantry Division endured that exact same nightmare on Okinawa, but only after surviving a frozen hell first. They were the only US division to fight in both the freezing Arctic and the tropical Pacific. The military initially sent them to the Aleutian Islands to retake Attu from the Japanese, where soldiers fought in freezing fog and deep snow without proper cold weather gear. The division suffered hundreds of casualties from frostbite and trench foot while repelling desperate nighttime banzai charges in the sub-zero temperatures. The War Department then sent the exhausted division to the tropical meat grinders of Kwajalein and Leyte. They fought through dense jungles and malarial swamps, taking heavy casualties from both enemy fire and tropical diseases. Their war culminated in the muddy slaughterhouse of Okinawa. The 7th rotated into the exact same conditions as the 96th Infantry Division. They fought hand-to-hand in the torrential rain, clearing coral caves with flamethrowers and satchel charges at point-blank range. They logged 208 days in combat and suffered over 9,000 battle casualties, supplemented by immense numbers of environmental casualties from both Arctic frostbite and tropical disease. The Pacific Theater pushed men to their physical limits, but the 3rd Infantry Division takes the top spot simply because the casualty reports are impossible to ignore. They fought across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, staying on the line for massive, uninterrupted stretches of time without relief. Their worst crucible came during the amphibious landings at Anzio in early 1944. The division held a highly compressed, flat beachhead against massive German counterattacks for months. The German military held the surrounding high ground and hammered the Anzio pocket daily with heavy artillery and massive railway guns. The tight geographic space meant there was absolutely no safe rear area to rest. Rear echelon clerks and frontline riflemen alike faced constant explosive threats, and by the end of the war, the 3rd Infantry Division had logged 531 days in combat and suffered 25,977 battle casualties, the highest total of any US division in the entire conflict. The casualty rate was so high that the military essentially had to rebuild the entire formation from scratch with replacement troops multiple times. So, can you objectively rank the worst deployments of the war? Well, historians still debate whether the freezing artillery barrages of Europe were worse than the close quarters cave fighting of the Pacific. But what isn't up for debate is the absolute hell these frontline infantry units endured. They took the heaviest casualties of the conflict, surviving in conditions that pushed the absolute limits of human endurance. If you had a family member who served in one of these units, or if you think another division's combat record demands a spot on this list, leave a comment below. But anyways guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.